Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest is an industry leader in machine learning who delivers custom learning programs for AI and analytics. 25 years of experience, software development, and team leadership. He is the co-owner of Blue Ridge Bicycle Tours, the board member of the Charlottesville Community Bikes. Please welcome Saul Yeaton. Welcome, Saul.
Thanks, Greg. It's really a pleasure to be here, and honestly, quite humbling. I've been enjoying some of your recent guests, and it's just the impact that you're having with letting those stories reach all of us is really fantastic. So thank you for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure. And did I butcher your last name? Is it Yeaton?
It's Yeaton. You nailed it, actually. So
Yeah.
stay the course. Yeah.
Well done, then. That's an improvement on this podcast. So, Saul, I love talking about endurance and especially the endurance mindset. So, I'd like to know, how has your endurance mindset impacted your life unexpectedly?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And I've in thinking about the some of the guests that you've had on in that question. It's a huge one. It's such a simple question, and I recognize that you've been able to really open up some really deep conversations. So I hope I can do that question justice. I'll start with a story, Greg, if it's okay, and I'm going to take you back. This will date me a bit, but back to 1996 in Athens, Georgia. And in Athens, Georgia, there's a race known as the Athens Twilight. It's one of the fastest and at its time one of the most well-known criterium races for bicycle racers. And I was so excited to be part of that race in 1996. I had moved up to be able to race at the top level. And I was racing among people who I'd only watched on TV. So people like Malcolm Elliott, I remember, and Chris Horner, who ends up riding the Tour de France, and Brian McDonough, who ends up riding the Olympics. And, here I am, just a young kid racing among giants in my mind. And fast forward towards the end of the race, and I'm still up front. And I'm just thinking I have made it through all of these hurdles to get there. And, I had started riding really young, and here I was probably in my 5th or 6th year, really competitive racing. And we get to the last lap, and I'm probably top 15, 20. And I'm thinking, like, I've done it. I have made it to what is sort of kind of the finish line in both a literal and a sort of a endurance mindset. And on the second corner, 2 people come together as one person rolls a tire on my right side, and Chris Horner on my left, who has long hair. And I don't know if anybody knows who will be listening. Chris Horner, he once had long hair. And I remember that vividly because as I'm crashing in the second quarter and sliding on, 2 millimeters of clothing and protection and just absolutely sprawled out on the second corner thinking, and there it went just like that. And so there I am, shredded. I'm shredded literally and emotionally and physically. There's blood and shredded clothing, and the EMTs are coming out to scrape you off the ground because it's 30 miles an hour and nothing good happens when you slide across the pavement. And I remember being emotionally just like it all let go in that moment. And I remember feeling so, you go from the ultimate high to the ultimate low. And other than your heart rate, which is still at 190 beats, I just felt so low. And, I'm going to fast forward through the ending of that, which is, I clearly don't finish the race because it's now over. And I end up getting bandaged up, and every joint on my body, elbow, knee, and so forth is bandaged up. I end up that night, because I can't sleep because I'm hurting and all that, walking back downtown to Athens, Georgia, and just staring at that corner and thinking, like, was that my last race? Is that, is this the moment where I'm going to go, yeah, I worked really hard. I was almost there. And, I couldn't have ridden better. I couldn't have been in better fitness. I couldn't have worked harder, but here I am, and I still didn't get it. And, I just remember staring at it going, like, kind of what now? And, those are one of those sort of, when you look back, really formative moments. And the phrase I came away with is I'm going to keep going. And it wasn't like this. It wasn't like this. Oh yeah, I'm going to get through this. It wasn't a moment of inspiration, but it was just simply, yeah, you know what? I have been training a long time, and this is not my first crash by any stretch. It was not my first hardship, maybe the biggest one, but I just decided to keep going. And I think those are one of those moments where you kind of make life decisions about the approach you're going to take when you hit those. And this is not, this is not a glamorous story. This is not, yeah, and then I rode the Tour de France next year. That didn't happen, but I did keep going, and I did do a lot of really nice things after that. And so that phrase really stuck with me. And a couple other points that I came away with. One is how important coaching had been for me in leading up to that and after that, and sort of rebuilding, to lean on someone who, my coach at that time is Bobby Livingston, a former Olympian, to lean on somebody who says, yeah, if you want to keep doing the work, we'll keep doing the work. And the other is that, and now that I have distance from it, those events are probably more formative than the successes. If I had come in top 10, it would have been awesome. I'm not sure that would have changed me in a formative way, in the way that difficult thing did. And so I've come to appreciate, maybe what we call failures in industry and in athletics, not really as failures. I mean, there was no failure in that respect other than the outcome. I didn't fail to work hard. I didn't fail to, do everything I could to do well, but I failed to cross the finish line in a place that I wanted to. But so, it's a change perspective. And so for me, I leave you with, just on that, that's a long-winded answer to your question, which is, from an endurance perspective, a lot of that carries over into so many places. Career, teenagers, parenting, all that.
And we'll dive into that. I mean, Saul, I love that story, and I was there with you. Like, I could feel it, right? That moment, that it's like that OS moment. Um, so I'm curious, like, as you replayed that probably 100,000 times in your brain and visually seeing it, was there something that could have changed, or you could have prevented it? Like, and I can only imagine at 30 miles an hour. I'm not sure my bike has ever been at that speed. I'm not sure it's capable of it. Um, like, as you relived it, was there something that you realized could have happened beforehand that would have prevented it? Or is it just one of those fluke accidents, people coming together, and it just, there's nothing that could have prevented the situation?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, when you follow up with those kind of events, your brain scrambles to go, what went wrong? And for
Mhm.
days, I remember thinking, why didn't I bump to make space? Why didn't I move up a half a wheel so that when somebody wrecked, I had an out, when things went bad? But the short answer is no. I couldn't have done everything really different, because I didn't know at the time. And at 198 beats per
Mhm.
minute, and in my mindset of, like, I just got to get to the finish line, this is it, I wasn't thinking of all the things I could do just in case. But in retrospect, and after years of coaching, and after years, of sort of learning other techniques, of course, there's always more you can do before and during, and to prevent and be proactive. But the answer is no. At that point, at that 21 or 22-year-old's mind, not a chance. Not a chance. And I can't blame that guy.
Yeah. And so I'm taking that one step further as a spectator of the tour. When I'm seeing those finishes and they're all out in a big group, how much of that is they're conscious of where other people are in the situation versus, hey, I'm just going to go for it and put every ounce of energy into this outcome. And if I end up bumping, then I end up bumping. But
Mm.
like, give me a sense of what that feels like from that athlete's perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. And um, sprinting as a general activity, and whether that's the last lap of a race, or the last 200-300 meters of a grand tour event, I believe is 100% instinct. And I would say it this way, and athletes that I work with, even in a steady state, I want them to be 80% instinct. So they're in a flow moment and they're spending very little time questioning, doubting, overanalyzing, and they're just in the moment. And when it comes to the finishes, I believe it's 100%. So all of that is instinct. And as I think about all the things you do to find spatial awareness and find your lines and find your right gear and all those things, if none of that is cognitive processing in an executive level, it's all very primal in that moment, but it's through hundreds, thousands of repetitions. And that was, and to your point earlier, um, there was no thinking going on in the last lap of that event, and I don't think I want anybody thinking in those crisis moments any more than in a car crash. I want somebody thinking like, what should I do now? It's got to be an instinct that preserves your outcome as best as possible.
That led me into thinking of a different question. You know, as you know, I do Ironman races. I'm a back of the packer. I love the environment. I love what I get out of it. But when I find myself in difficult situations in the race, I've usually been in that same situation, whether it's nutrition or a flat tire or I just don't have the gas. I usually have had that situation in my training. And you talked about coaching.
Mm.
How much of that preparation, of those sprint finishes, to use the example, has been sort of replicated already in training?
I think training is such a broad term. That's a great question, and I would think about training in sort of various ways because if you're at home on your trainer, that's a very different kind of training versus you're out with your peers and you're pre-riding a course, or you're at what I'll call a training event, which may be an early season sprint try where you're just trying to kind of get into the flow of a sequence of things. And so um, on one hand, a lot of things can be replicated in training, but on the other hand, there's, in my mind, no true simulation for the real thing, which is not just I got a flat tire, but you got a flat tire in the middle of an event while people are passing you and while your heart rate is 100 and whatever, and you're freaking out, your hands are jittery, and you're going, if I do this right, it's 4 minutes, and if I do it wrong, it's 24 minutes. And can you simulate that? To some degree, right? That's my mind. And I think coaches and leaders, maybe as a coach, I would try to put somebody in a simulated circumstance, but I also don't know if I would pretend that I could simulate the jitters of, you know, um, what it really means to be in the moment. Yeah. So you tell
Yeah.
me. I mean, I guess I would say there's no quite parallel to the real thing.
That's right. But I find that have gone going through those difficult times while training gives you a little bit of confidence and a little bit of edge, a little bit of like, hey, I'm going to get to back to your point that we really started this conversation.
Mm,
Just decide to keep going. It's going to get better from those down points. And so, in a race or in a training session, when you just feel like there's no way I'm finishing this thing,
yeah.
all right, let's take on the next minute. Let's take on the next 50 yards. Let's take these things on and kind of incrementally get there.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to ask you a little bit more technical question as a athlete who's trying to become better at cycling, um, and with many sort of amateur athletes and CEOs listening to this podcast. Talk to us about use of power and wattage in the training cycles,
Yeah.
and also I guess in racing as well. Like, is it a huge component? Is it something we should really be grabbing onto, as an ex-professional, or is it something that some use and some don't? Give us a little sense of how power is used in wattage in cycling.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and for context, power really existed only as a concept when I started riding as a teenager, and then only top level professionals had it for a while, and then today it's accessible to effectively everyone at a very cost effective sort of way. So I've seen this sort of before and after of the accessibility of it, and overall, having coached cyclists for a long time, the phrase that I probably most often say, and I stole this from Eddie Merckx, but the best training you can do is to ride the bike. Now,
Mm.
the next layer for that which is really just a quantity measure. can you ride, people will talk about, ride to go get coffee, ride home, ride to lunch, ride for training, ride to see your friends, and just be putting in as many hours as you can. That's sort of an old school thinking. So certainly it's a little bit oversimplified, but I probably would still lean on that as a foundational layer. The next layer really is thinking about intensity. And we used to, of course, use heart rate only. That was the best we could do to sort of measure the effort we were putting in. And we would measure resting heart rates as sort of a proxy for how well we recover. And today, if we fast forward, everyone can have access to a Whoop and a power meter, and so they can give you a number for how you're recovering and how efficient you are in producing your power, and also what your power is. So I think they're useful tools. But as somebody who's coached for a long time, I would say they can be really distracting. If you spend an hour a day analyzing your power instead of an hour a day training, I would ask the question, what is it you're after here? You know, if you're a power analyst as a trade, that's great. But if you're just trying to get better, stronger, faster, you could probably just rest with, I'm seeing that my numbers are going up over the long term, and I think that can be really helpful. So that is the punchline is to say, I think there's maybe an over fascination with it because it is addictive. I mean, and I remember as a coach, it was addictive to be able to see every second of someone's ride that I was coaching and their heart rate and their power and their altitude and what was going on. But do I want to spend the whole conversation doing analytics with them, or do I want to find their motivation and say, hey, could you have gone harder that day, or did you feel like you should have gone easier because you just weren't getting the power you wanted? And to me, that's where improvement it really is. Power can help inform that, and it's lovely to have a really objective measure. So, you know, I, I know people who say I can't ride without it, and I get it because they're addicted to it and they get a number staring at them all day. That feels like a little bit much for me.
It's interesting that you responded that way, because one of the things that I notice about myself is I will bury myself in the data or into the bike route or into where I'm going to pick up nutrition on my run, almost as an excuse not to get started on the workout, right? And next thing you know, 30 minutes has slipped by, and now you're going to bump up to some family obligation, and next thing you know, I've overcomplicated the situation by overanalyzing the front end
Yeah.
of the situation.
I was just say, but it's so appealing. I mean, it's eye candy. Did I hit 650 watts at that place? I've only been able to hit 580 before. I mean, it's just they can be really exciting. So, but I would also say, if that's part of your motivation, I think that's awesome. Yeah, not you or other people. I think that, if that's what gets you on the bike, good on you.
Yeah, that's spot on. So you also mentioned earlier, how racing endurance training relates to your career, parenting, other aspects of your life. Can you go in a little bit more detail what you meant by that?
One of the so we talked earlier that I co-own Blue Ridge Bicycle Tours, and um, this was born out of a couple big events that had been part of my life. One was just bike riding and sort of as being a very social, and I had got into coaching, but I came to understand that bike touring was more than just, well, we take you from A to B. It's not shuttle vanning as we sort of imagined it when we started the business. Um, One of the events that I had done for years prior to launching the business formally was a retreat in Banner Elk, North Carolina. And if you follow the news, that community has been really devastated lately. And that hits me really closely because that's a place where I have spent many weeks of my life in retreat and with other people sort of in retreat from corporate living. And uh, when we started doing that, it was a place that we could train in an undistracted way. As I've gotten older and we launched the business, it's a place that we invite people to go and spend time really without the obligations of career, family, and all the other things that surround our daily routines. And what I had learned was, if you can just fully immerse yourself in training where the only thing you have to do every day is eat, ride, and recover, it is absolutely incredible what you're capable of. You can go longer and faster and produce more power because there's just not so many restrictions and not so many distractions on your brain. And we discovered that when people in that environment, some really magical things happen, one in their performance, but also they are forced to visit. If they're having a bad day, they really go head on with, well, I can't blame it on my kids. I can't blame it on I had to mow the lawn last night. I can't blame it on that long meeting I had till 11:30 with my executive team. And so you face your demons in this sort of environment. And so that is a long circle to say when that mindset, I learned if you can put people in a place where they're just truly focused, it is absolutely incredible. And they have these really important light bulb moments. And some of those, to bring it into sort of, I'll call it more pedestrian sort of scenarios, even in a 2-hour bike tour of kind of downtown Charlottesville or our area, people will have these just sort of epiphanies of, oh my gosh, like something will go off in their head. And it's just to create that environment for them is really special. And that is learned by accident. I mean, I'd love to say like, oh, when we started all this, like I knew that was going to happen, but we landed on it by accident, and we are just delighted when it happens. And I see my role is to sort of create environments and support people in those, whether it's a week in Banner Elk, North Carolina, or whether it's 2 hours on a three speed hybrid around town.
So was that a light bulb moment for you? Were you on a tour or on a bike or just sort of somewhere else, non-distracted, undistracted, when you realized, hey, the real sort of value of what we're doing is the retreat aspect of it. It's the breakaway, it's the focus.
Yeah, and maybe I just add another phrase to that, which is to create that mental space. I was on actually a Blue Ridge Parkway ride before we had started the business. I think it's 2010, and there weren't a lot of tour companies in the area. I think approximately zero, and we did that, with some friends, and the experience for me was 100% mental and 0% physical in its sort of impact on me, which was, oh my gosh, if I just have several hours a day to do long thinking, rather than the reacting, rather than the firefighting, it turns out that for me, that creates a really different headspace than, I'm an executive, here's a crisis. How do I triage it? How do I break it into smaller components? How do I assign it? How do I delegate it? That's a really different brain than I've got 6 hours to think about something. And so, yeah, I had a light bulb moment that was just because there was space to have light bulbs. And one of them was, why the heck aren't there tour companies in Central Virginia? And so my friend Andy and I started this business to help other people have space for light bulbs. I mean, it was really as simple as that. And here we are today, 10 years later, still doing that.
So for the audience members who don't know the Blue Ridge Parkway, give us a little sense of what that highway is like.
Yeah, it's a friend of mine who's ridden it a bunch of times calls it biker's paradise. And if you've never been on it, especially people on the sort of the west side of the U.S., it's a stretch that goes roughly from sort of the northern Virginia all the way down to Georgia, and it's just dedicated for scenic driving and riding. And so most of the traffic, especially during the week, is just people going about 28 miles an hour in their car looking around. And in our area, actually, Skyline Drive down to Afton, Virginia, and then it resets as the Blue Ridge Parkway down to Georgia. And I've ridden from here down to Asheville and then sort of north of here on Skyline Drive. They're more or less the same thing. And we loved, when we started the business, we thought people will come from all over the world to ride this. And in fact, when we launched it was the year the World Championships were hosted in Richmond, Virginia. And we thought, what an opportunity to share with people what is one of the best riding opportunities in the world. And it turns out the population has changed, and our hypothesis was that we would have people coming by the dozens every week to ride this parkway, and um, less than that come. I'll say that, but and especially this time of year, it couldn't be more beautiful. You ask it at an interesting time because tragically the Blue Ridge Parkway is closed at this moment, so it is unavailable even to us locals because of all the destruction that's happened along the way.
So for your business, are you for potential customer, somebody's interested, they're listening to the show today, are there sort of predefined dates and rides that you're advertising, or is it a custom, like I've got an executive team and we're looking to
Right.
try something new. Let's call Saul and Blue Ridge Touring and see if we can arrange a 2-day sort of mind space.
Yep. It's definitely the latter. You missed the opportunity for the Better Call Saul line there. And I would say when we started, we thought like, oh, we'll have pre-scheduled events and we'll slot people into sort of parkway tours. In the modern world, we find that most people are exactly where you said you are, which is, and I just got off the phone with somebody yesterday. I've got 5 people coming from Maryland. We want to do a retreat where we had a successful year with my real estate group, and you know those are the typical things, and that's what we serve is people with a we put together sort of outlines of events for people, but they pick the time and they pick really the duration, and we make sure it's fully supported, and we put guides with them that are a match for their sort of personality and speed, both in a emotional and physical level. And often people are using e-bikes and they want to go 10 miles an hour and just look around, and then often people are hey, I want to spend 2 days up on the parkway and we want to absolutely crush it, and those are different events entirely, and we don't want to mix those two together. So
No, and that was leading into my next question. It's how do you assess, right? If you're bringing in your management team and you've got an avid cyclist CEO who's, done all the big climbs
yeah,
and done Ironman and done all these things. And then you've got the rest of the management team who last time they sat on their bike was when they're 15 years old. Like, how do you customize
yeah.
that?
I this is actually the secret sauce, and if I were to say the hardest thing about serving well, we've learned in the last 10 years, is to be able to assess with the right questions, because the right questions aren't how fit are you. The right question isn't when's the last time you touched a bike, because people all of a sudden get into a really defensive sort of mindset.
Mhm.
But if we get to know what their objectives are for and ask questions like what are you looking for in the event, things come out for us that we discover, okay, this is a handful of e-bikes, or this is we need to get them high end race bikes and make sure they're outfitted for the thing. Even even questions as simple as how tall are you can actually be difficult. This can be a sensitive topic. I'll just say that. So, so this is, yeah. I mean, and I'm not trying to completely dodge the question, but it's also not an easy answer to say how do we do that, because it's something we've learned over 10 years how to ask the right questions and then translate their answer into the facts that of what we need to do to get the right people and the right equipment to them.
So I have to ask, what was the most unexpected story that has come out of hosting a group, over these years that you've been organizing? What's that story that you've got sort of under the cover that nobody has heard about that you just want to let out today?
Yeah. Gosh, most of them I don't want to, and I'm going to tell you two stories, because they'll sort of bookend some of our experiences. On one, uh, there's a company in town that used to do a global retreat and host it here. This is pre-COVID when people were more about getting together and traveling, and so 50 people, a 50-person tour, and logistically this is the Everest of the tour world, which is how in the world, I mean, just from a bikes and guides and rides and routes and traffic, how are you going to handle that? And so this was a big thing for us, and we had somebody along the way. They came back uh 50 yards into the ride and said, I'm not feeling it. And I wasn't part of their sort of smaller group. I later learned that they didn't know how to ride a bike, and
Mm.
we had sort of failed to sort of assess or recognize or they failed to communicate that in any way. And that's a thing we try. I mean, safety is our number one thing. Our job number one is to keep people safe. So that was one of those moments where I'm going, oh boy, we are not going to get this tour again if people are just running off the road. No injuries happened, but it was one of those sort of terrifying moments. On the other end, I can still remember the phone call. Andy called me and said, "Hey, you're going to want to be on this tour on Sunday." And I said, "Andy, like, just no offense, man, but Sundays aren't my thing. It's my day off, and I'm trying to, we're at church and we're doing all that." And he goes, "No, you're going to want to be at this one." I said, I don't understand." I'm like, what's going on?" He said, "Well, they called me and they said it's an ultra VIP." And I said, "I didn't know." I thought VIP was sort of like, that's it. And I know this is ultra VIP. Can you tell me who it is? And he tells me who it is. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be there for that event. A super interesting person, and they were really private about it, so I'm not going to share the name. But they didn't want photos, they didn't want anybody seeing it. They, ultra VIP has a meaning, I guess, to those people. This is also a person that rarely talks to anybody else, and I learned later that, like, I'm one of probably 10 people that have ever had a 2-hour conversation with this person. And that's a really, so that was the thing. And in my world, to spend 2 hours with this person was a pretty important thing. Still head spinning. There's an expression, sort of, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. I'm not sure this person does that. This person might have people helping them put their pants on in the morning. So yeah, and we've been at it for a long time, so unexpected things by definition happen by a law of numbers, and we've learned to just really go with that. And whether that's people who have never ridden a bike or they're a multi-billionaire, and uh, it's part of the joy of it.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time on Skyline Drive when training for my first Ironman. I was at Lake Placid,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a lot of climbing on that.
Yeah.
So for those listening, if you were in a training group and I had a friend just recently take on Wisconsin, and he lives in a very flat area, and all of his training was on pancake roads.
Mm.
And he gets to Wisconsin, he's like, wait a second, these things are actually things I got to climb. And he DNFs. Was sad for him, but he made the right call because he wasn't trained on it.
Yep.
So to the point, if you're in a training group and you're looking for a great opportunity to get some hills and some altitude in, you should be looking up Blue Ridge Touring, because Skyline Drive, Blue Ridge Parkway, once it reopens, are amazing places to get that training in. So a little commercial for you, Saul. What else are you up to these days?
Well, and I'll just put another 30 seconds on that point, which is, some people are motivated by intervals. I go 80% for 45 seconds and then I recover, and then I go 80%, and then they can just do that because their mind and body are machines. Some people prefer going out to beautiful roads where the hills does the intervals for you. And Skyline Drive, absolutely, you have no choice. You're not going to go easy pace up a 1 mile climb. It's going to force you into a certain level of exertion, and it's going to force your heart rate to do the same profile as the course. So if that's you, I would say, whether you're working with us or whether you're just out there yourself, it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to get motivated on roads like that. So yeah, thanks for that. And to your other question, what am I up to now? My career path is really about coaching, teaching, and the learning and development world. And so one of the passions that I have discovered in the last few years is soccer coaching. And one of the beautiful things about, and I've been coaching at some level for 15 years now, some, sports and otherwise. Soccer coaching is one of these places where you can see immediate results, and it's absolutely addictive. And that is, you might have a light bulb moment for somebody in a 5-minute activity. You might make a breakthrough on a daily basis for a young person that is formative in their future every session. I am lucky in a corporate world if that happens once a quarter, where I'm in a session and some executive goes like, oh, and then sort of resets, and then we'll hear that feedback later. I changed something in our process as a result of this activity. And those are awesome. But the the instant feedback and the physical transformation to see for me in soccer coaching has been absolutely addictive. And it's also a canvas for me where every session I screw something up tremendously and have learned the resilience of, and I'll do that better next time. And if I can survive that, I'll get through it. And athletes have learned to see that humility in me. And hey guys, I really screwed up explaining what we were supposed to be doing here. Let me give that another shot, and I'll give me 2 more minutes. Okay, and here we go. There's a snowball effect of through that I've just really become addicted to. And I didn't play high level soccer growing up, but I've immersed myself in that space. I'm just finishing up my national C license coaching this week actually, and it's something I expect to be doing at some level the rest of my life, because it is a form of coaching that is just so impactful. So that's again a long-winded answer to teaching and coaching and learning and development are my passions. It is just a place where, and those of us who are in that field, we all look at each other and go, yeah, of course. Like, this is, you found your thing. And I'm embarrassed that it took me till I was probably 45 to sort of figure that out. But better late than never, maybe.
What's the aspiration with your coaching?
Right now, I'm doing two things. I coach club soccer and I'm coaching high school. I see the path towards coaching higher level high school. That's a place where there's an intersection of, growing young adults, career aspirations, and athletic. And that intersection is a place where I feel like I can serve and add a lot of value. So I'm positioning myself to be able to be a head coach long term there. That requires a couple things. One is a bit of a depth of experience, but maybe most importantly, availability. You have to be, in many cases, well connected to an academic institution like a high school, and then also available at 4:15 when practice starts. And I don't know about you, but that isn't always the case on my corporate calendar. So that's the path that I'm on right now. And every day is a learning. Yeah. Yeah.
Very well said. Well, the University of Virginia's got a pretty good soccer program. So keep your eye on that one.
We're 2 miles from this, actually 1 mile from the stadium. So we're fortunate to be able to take in a bunch of that and be well connected to that community. That's a level that I aspire to even understand. I mean, they're such an international program, but yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's truly on men's and women's side, it's truly a fantastic program.
So, audience member would like to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I would say reach out to our Blue Ridge Bicycle Tours website. It's blueridgebicycletours.com. You can hit us with an email or a note there, and whether that's a career question, or you're trying to get your player to hit penalty kicks better, or whether you want to spend 5 days on the parkway, we'd be happy to respond to them then and take the conversation from there. So thank you, Greg.
Awesome. And we'll include those links in the show notes. I'm going to have to invite you back for another podcast to talk about penalty kicks and what the mental preparation required, with millions of people watching, the game on the line, the World Cup on the line, like what that must take to execute, sometimes flawlessly, many times it just happens to go in. But Saul, it's been awesome to have you on the show. I really enjoyed starting off our conversation around the endurance mindset, and when you picked yourself up after that bike crash and said, I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah.
And then really leaning into sort of creating that mental space for ourselves and using retreats. And I love my bike, and using this bike or your run or whatever it takes to get you out of sort of, the distractions that you sit in front of every day with your email and et cetera. So it's been, again, great. Audience members, if you got some value out of the show, please like the show, please subscribe. Let's share Saul's message in this conversation with our community.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for the opportunity. Good luck to all the listeners, and keep going.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits